All right, get ready for one of the most unbelievable stories you will ever hear. It's about a man, a soldier, whose personal war didn't end until nearly 30 years after the rest of the world had moved on. So picture this. It's March 1974. The Vietnam War is winding down. Led Zeppelin is on the radio, and World War II has been over for 29 years. But deep in the jungle of a small island in the Philippines, one man is still fighting it. Which brings us to the big question, right? How on earth is that even possible? Well, this is the story of Hiro Onoda, a Japanese intelligence officer whose war lasted almost 3 decades longer than everyone else's. To really get our heads around this, we need to understand the man himself. So this is Hiro Onoda. When he was finally found, his uniform was patched and tattered, but his rifle, it was perfectly maintained. Because in his mind, it wasn't 1974. The enemy was still out there, and his mission was still very, very active. Now, the fascinating thing here is that Onoda wasn't crazy. Not at all. His actions were born from an incredible, almost incomprehensible sense of duty. And to get that, you have to understand the world he came from, a world with a very, very different code. You see, the Japan that Onoda grew up in was a deeply militaristic empire. And this way of thinking was total. From the time you were a kid, you were taught that dying for the emperor was the highest honor you could achieve. Surrender? That wasn't just losing a battle. It was the ultimate personal shame. An order from your commander was absolute. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was law. This mindset, this conditioning, it's the key to this entire story. And this right here, this is the moment that defined the next 30 years of his life. Right before being sent to Lubang Island, Onoda's commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, gave him this very specific order. It was more than a command. It was a promise. We will come back for you. Those words became his reality. So, with that order basically burned into his brain, Onoda lands on Lubang Island. He's there to wage a guerrilla war. And then the entire world changes. But his reality doesn't. So August 1945 comes around, Japan surrenders. The war is officially over. Leaflets are dropped all over the island saying, hey, it's done, come on out. But for an intelligence officer trained to expect tricks and deception, this was just classic enemy propaganda. In his mind, it was simple. The war can't be over because my commander hasn't come back to tell me it's over. So the war continued. For years, Onoda and his small team survived in the jungle. They saw their actions as legitimate guerrilla warfare, raiding villages for supplies, gathering intelligence on what they thought were enemy patrols, but their enemy was actually just local villagers and Filipino police. And as the decades crawl by, time and isolation start to take their toll. First, one of his men surrenders, then another is killed in a shootout. And finally, in 1972, his last remaining companion is killed, leaving Onoda completely, utterly alone. And here's the tragic part of this whole story. This is the real human cost of that unwavering mission. Over their 29-year campaign, Onoda's unit was responsible for the deaths of around 30 Filipinos. These weren't enemy soldiers. They were farmers and police officers, casualties of a war that, by that point, existed only in one man's head. Over the years, countless search parties tried to find him. They dropped newspapers, letters, even played voice recordings from his family over loudspeakers. Nothing worked. It was going to take a totally different kind of person to finally break through. Enter Norio Suzuki. This guy was a character. He was a college dropout, an adventurer, and he had this, well, bizarre bucket list. And for some reason, finding this legendary ghost soldier was right up there with finding the Yeti. He wasn't military, he wasn't official, he was just a curious kid who wanted an adventure. And here's the truly wild part. After decades of failed searches by trained professionals, this kid, Suzuki, finds him in just 4 days. He literally just pitched a tent and called out Onoda's name. When Onoda finally appeared ready to shoot, Suzuki didn't run. He just said, "Onoda-san, the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." And for the first time in 29 years, Onoda wasn't talking to an enemy. He was talking to a fellow countryman. But even after hours of talking, even after starting to believe Suzuki's incredible story, that conditioning was just too strong. He couldn't break his vow. The war could only end the same way it started for him, with a direct, face-to-face order from his commanding officer. So, Suzuki flies back to Japan with proof, a photo of him and Onoda, and this sets in motion one last incredible mission to finally bring this soldier home.
The Japanese government actually had to launch a search, not for Onoda, but for his old commander. And they found him. Major Yoshimi Taniguchi was no longer a major. He was an old man running a small bookstore. His own life had completely moved on, while his subordinates had been frozen in time. He agreed to go. And this is the scene. It's almost surreal. Onoda, now 52 years old, emerges from the jungle in his patched-up uniform and stands at perfect attention. And his former commander, Major Taniguchi, formally reads the surrender orders from 1945. Onoda finally broke down and wept as he handed over his samurai sword. After more than 10,000 days, his mission was finally over.
Onoda returned to Japan a hero. To many, he was this living symbol of old-world duty and loyalty. The problem was, he returned to a Japan that he just didn't recognize at all.
I mean, just try to imagine the culture shock. The country he left was a militaristic empire, totally focused on war and sacrifice. The country he came back to was a peaceful, democratic, economic giant. It was a world of skyscrapers, neon lights, and a generation that had absolutely no idea what his war was even about. It was a completely different planet.
And even though he was celebrated, he just couldn't fit in. This new Japan was too alien for him. So he left and moved all the way to Brazil to become a cattle rancher. But here's a really powerful final note to his story. Years later, in 1996, he went back to Lubang Island. He met with some of the families of the people his unit had killed and donated $10,000 to a local school. It was his gesture of peace.
Hiro Onoda's story is just an incredible testament to the power of belief, of duty, and raw human endurance. But it does leave you wondering, doesn't it? He absolutely won his personal 29-year battle. But in a world that just kept spinning without him, did he end up losing the war against time?